Hi there, everybody. I'm Sarah Lennox. I'm on the Northampton Neighbors Board and also on the Speaker Series Committee. And what I'm going to do right now is tell you a little bit about Northampton Neighbors and how the session today is going to run. And then I'm going to introduce our speaker, Pamela Schwartz. And I want to say, you maybe have already grasped this. This is our first effort to run the speaker series in a hybrid form. So we have an audience out here and we have an audience online. And that's a little complicated, but we've been practicing and practicing. So we hope it's going to work out all right. But if it doesn't, if there are glitches, bear with us and we'll figure it out. So first, a little bit about Northampton Neighbors, and maybe I think there are a lot of members out there, so you may know all this. So Northampton Neighbors launched in November 2017. Maybe some of you were already around. And now we have, believe it or not, 1,638 members as of last night, which is pretty amazing and pretty terrific. As you may know, we're part of an international movement called the Village Movement, and villages, which are virtual villages, not real life places, are dedicated to providing older people in particular locations with the services and social and cultural connections they need to stay in their own homes as they age. As you may know, Northampton Neighbors is open to anyone, anywhere. So anyone, anywhere can become a member, but to receive services, you need to be over 55, living in Northampton, Florence, or Leeds. One of the really great things about and unique things about Northampton Neighbors is that we're free, which means that anyone can join, not just those with means. We're one of the very few villages that charges no fee. And something I've been kind of charmed by is there are a lot of villages in the surrounding areas that have opened up since Northampton Neighbors launched, and they have followed our example and are also charging no fee. So might be a movement, which would be really wonderful. So even during the worst of COVID, we found a lot of ways to get together on Zoom, including interest groups like gardening and book discussions and food interests, neighborhood circles in various areas around the series, and this speaker series. So those of you who've been around for a while might remember that we hosted some great speakers in the senior center, beginning, if you remember, with Steve Harrell talking about his life in ice cream and providing free ice cream sundaes. So that was pretty terrific, but also a lot of terrific talks. Starting in May 2020, because we decided to resort to Zoom, which worked out really well and allowed people to engage in social events at a time when they couldn't gather in person. And now, as you see, as those of you out here in the audience see, we're very cautiously offering in-person speakers again, but as well, we're providing a Zoom option so that people who are still worried about COVID, which there is some reason to be, or great reason to be, or otherwise not able to get out, can watch the speakers at home. And now, besides offering services again, which we've been doing for a while, we've also geared up to provide other in-person events, including the Mix and Mingle. And if you haven't been to one yet, the last outside Mix and Mingle is happening next Tuesday, October 17th, from 4:30 to 6 in the Spoleto's tent. So it's really great. You just come and hang out and, talk to people. Really great way to get more integrated into the Northampton Neighbors community. We also have the Nearly Sunset Social, which meets at the NoHo Social Club on King Street. We have Sandwiches and Stories, which meets once a month on Zoom and once a month on the historic Northampton Terrace. And there are lots of other interest groups that meet either on Zoom or in person. So we hope to see you again very soon, either in person or on the screen. So now what's going to happen today? Pamela is going to talk about 25 minutes, and then she'd like to respond to your questions. And that's going to be a teeny bit complicated because we're in hybrid. So if you are here in person, if you have a question, just raise your hand and Pamela will recognize you, and then she's going to repeat the question back into her microphone. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. She's going to repeat the question back into her microphone so the people on Zoom can hear it. If you're out there on Zoom, please type your question into the chat. And the way you find the chat is looking at the bottom of the icons at the bottom of your screen. Click on the chat icon and then type your question in the space that comes up on the right-hand side. And don't forget to press enter, which I have often forgotten to do. Then I'm going to read your question so people in the audience know what it is. We hope this is actually going to work. We'll see. If you're having trouble hearing, or if you'd like to read along as well as listening, if you're on Zoom, you click on CC at the bottom of the page, which will give you a transcript that you can follow along. If you're here in person, you can read the captions on the big screen behind me. We also want to tell you that this event is being recorded, so if you'd rather not show up in the recording, just turn your camera off. If you're on Zoom, the best way to watch this is in speaker view, and you find that up in the right-hand corner, you have the option between speaker view and gallery view, so click on speaker view. If you'd like to hear the talk again or recommend it to your friends, it will be available on the Northampton Neighbors YouTube site or also on Northampton Open Media, Channel 12, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9, and Tuesday, Thursday at 7. Oh, and please turn your cell phones off. Okay, and now to the star attraction, Pamela Schwartz. Pamela, there is Pamela Schwartz on your screen. Pamela has served as director of the Western Massachusetts Network to End Homelessness since 2009. The Western Massachusetts Network to End Homelessness coordinates over 150 partners and state and local leaders across the 4 Western counties to prevent and end homelessness with a housing first approach that centers on racial equity. Pamela began her career as a legal services lawyer, representing low-income tenants, and then moved into policy work with the Tax Equity Alliance of Massachusetts, now the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the National Priorities Project. She's also worked as an organizer on a number of ballot and electoral campaigns and served in elected office as a Northampton City Councilor from 2009 to 2013. And in fact, she was a counselor in my ward, and she lives across the street from me. Pamela, so we're a community. Pamela is a graduate of Barnard College, 1985, and the NYU School of Law, 1988. She's lived in Northampton since 1993 with her husband, Joel Feldman, and their 3 grown children who are proud graduates of the Northampton Public Schools. So today she's going to be talking to us about homelessness in our community, in our state, how your political engagement can make a difference. So take it away, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the kind introduction. Good to see you. Good to see you. It's a funny thing. You're behind me, you're in front of me, and we'll all have a conversation. So anyway, I am here, as Sarah said. I'm a 30-year resident of Northampton. This Northampton Senior Center is like a home away from home from the point of view of community events and activities. And it's just great to be here for this reason, for Northampton neighbors. And what I'm happy to do over these next minutes is give you a landscape, a snapshot of homelessness in our region. Because Western Massachusetts Network to End Homelessness covers the 4 counties from Springfield to the Berkshires, the data that I have that I'm about to share with you is both 4 counties. It's either all 4 counties or it's the way the data collections organized. And then there's the three what's called rural counties, Hampshire, Franklin, and Berkshire. So you'll see that's the landscape I'm gonna be presenting to you. And the title of this talk is how, I actually need to look at my cover page, which I'm gonna share in a minute, but I just wanted, before I disappear into a little box for people who are viewing, I wanna just talk to all of you together. But I do know that the thrust of it is how you can make a difference, how you can be engaged, how you can, because it's a very overwhelming problem. And so while I'm going to create a landscape for you, I'm then gonna move into the policy change and the work towards policy change that is afoot that would make a very real difference. The good news about this terrible, terrible crisis that we're in is that it's not a mystery how to solve it, right? There's many, to use the most current example that's so utterly devastating, I was about to go parallel something to the Middle East, but I can't even do it. It's too tragic. The point is there are many problems out there that feel unsolvable, and homelessness isn't. It feels that way in face of what we're staring at every day, but it's actually a matter of political will that is eminently doable. And there are there are solutions that are born of developing that political will, which is where all of us can come in. So with that, I'm gonna start with the presentation. I'm gonna share my screen, and all of you will see it in your various versions. Okay, is this showing up? Is this showing up for you? Yes, awesome. Okay, yes, how your political engagement can make a difference. That's where we're gonna land. But before we land there, we've gotta get grounded together in what we're looking at. So here is the mission statement that Sarah read already. We're basically here to prevent and end homelessness with a housing first approach that centers racial equity. Before I even go past the mission statement, it's very important for me to spell out the meaning of housing first. It may be familiar to some of you, but I wanna make sure it's familiar to all of you, because it's a term of art that has a very distinct meaning. Housing first, the good news is it does mean what it sounds like, which is that the best solution to homelessness is housing first. The implications of that, as logical as that is, if you don't have a home, let's get a home, let's ensure that everyone has a home. It is harder, needless to say, to execute than the words sound, because for many reasons, but one of them, in terms of our societal and our biases, frankly, is that housing should be available to all people, no matter what they are struggling with. And that means that it's the housing first. Other terms that you're going to hear are low barrier or low threshold. So if you have a criminal record, if you have a mental health issue, if you have a substance use problem, those cannot be barriers to access to housing, to be a housing first model. And it may not come as a surprise to you that many, many housing programs that exist today have those barriers. They have criteria that create barriers that defy the concept of housing first. And I will say the good news is conceptually, our state embraces the concept of housing first. Our nation does. Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the federal department, they are leaders in housing first. It is a data-driven principle and belief and approach that shows that, that data has shown that the best response, the most effective method for staying stably housed is housing. And just to break that down in a way that makes it even more comprehensible is for me to explain the contrast. Because not only is there the stuff of barriers that I described, but what happened in the 70s and 80s is that the approach that was very understood was what you would call housing ready, that somebody would experience homelessness, enter shelter, and upon entering shelter, the thinking then was, we don't want to set them up to fail and get them housed too soon. We want to ensure that they've got their ducks in a row, that they've got everything they need to be stable, that they have their mental health treatment or their substance use treatment or their job or their GED or whatever it is, or their driver's license. We're going to make sure that they've got all they need so they can stay stably housed. That's an approach called housing ready. What happened is one would call the growth of the shelter industrial complex, is that people stayed and stayed and stayed. And then there are pioneers in the field in the early 90s that said, let's try something different. Let's say you are homeless, you are experiencing homelessness, we have a home for you here, and here are the services that you need, here are the resources that you need, here's the case management support that you need to stay stably housed. And lo and behold, this is where the data comes in. The rate of stability, of housing stability, was extraordinary. A housing first approach works. And if we think about it as human beings, presuming that most of us here, if not all of us here, are living in a home, that having four walls, having the dignity of four walls, having a bathroom, having that is more or less yours or a limited number of people's, this makes a difference in one's sense of capacity to live in the world and to engage in one's challenges. So there's a logic, and I just want to say it was borne out by the data. So now we have a nationwide approach of housing first. So the good news is it's embraced, it's understood. The harder news is there's still plenty of gaps. There's still plenty of gaps out there where there are housing developments that come online where people are going, we can only have you if. And so that's where our work continues, and that's why it's in our mission statement. Housing first is something that is, while it's proven, while it's understood, we have gap closing to do. So another thing I want to point out here that's on the screen is we have a blog, and one of the things I'm going to ask of all of you, one of the threshold things that all of you can do is join our blog, because it's going to be a very concrete, small, but meaningful way for us to stay connected in the work of addressing homelessness. Right now, we have almost 800 subscribers. Bring us to 833. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to start by laying out the landscape, the problem, the scope of the problem. It's difficult, really, to stop and take in these numbers as each one as an individual human being living without a home. And it's an undercount. So this number right now is, as right now, meaning the number on the screen that you're seeing, is 3,305 people in Western Massachusetts alone, the 4 Western counties. That is based on an annual point-in-time count that is mandated by HUD. HUD delivers homelessness funds to our region across our region on the order of almost $10 million a year. They deliver homelessness funds all over the country through entities called continuums of care. I won't go any further than that in the weeds, but every community, in order to get federal homelessness dollars, has a continuum of care. In order to get those dollars, you must do an annual point-in-time count. So that's a very foundational source of our data. It is also a basis, for instance, where Congress, for advocating or for basically sharing with Congress the breadth of the problem. If you've read headlines along the way of the homelessness count is X, we are up to 500,000 homeless people across the country. That's based in the cumulative, in the compilation of communities' annual point-in-time count. HUD only counts people who are either living in shelter or on the street or in a place not fit for human habitation. It does not count people who are doubled up, tripled, sleeping on couches, couch surfing. So this number is a very significant undercount of people who are experiencing homelessness in our region. And it's a baseline. It's a universal baseline that is used nationwide. More upsetting news. It'll be a relief for us to get to policy change, but we got to suffer through the reality of what we're facing. The 2023 count was higher than at any point in the last 5 years. We saw a drop in 2019 to 2021 and an increase of 24% from 2021 to 2023. What is interesting and important information, one of the drop when the pandemic hit, there was the emergency response, an incredibly powerful display of political will, let's be clear, what we are capable of doing as a society, as a government, when faced with what the leaders deem is an emergency. And in that emergency, there was the expansion of hotel rooms for people experiencing homelessness. And we saw in that the rate of rehousing out of hotel rooms was markedly higher than people who were living in congregate shelter. That's a term of art, congregate shelter. It means if we think about it, congregate, big room, cots, no privacy. So the difference in rehousing over the course of the height of the pandemic for people in hotel rooms versus congregate shelter group living was remarkable. And that is yet another data point about the impact of having your own four walls in your ability to participate in the hard work of getting rehoused, in the document acquiring, in the paperwork filling. There's so many hoops to jump through. We know that in any transaction, any housing transaction. The capacity to do that was markedly increased through the hotel room situation. We also know hotel rooms are a whole lot more expensive than congregate shelter. We also know hotels were shut down during the pandemic, so that was a rare opportunity. And we also know it's still not our solution. Our solution's housing, but it is to recognize that that drop, in part over the height of COVID, was a function of the interventions that were happening at that time. So the interventions have more or less stopped, and we are watching homelessness rise, and we are watching housing costs rise, and that is not a coincidence. Here, just to break it down a little bit more, Hampshire, Franklin, Berkshire, you can see, I mean, you saw on the big map, the overwhelming proportion of people who are experiencing homelessness in Hampden County. Here, we have 622 people across our three more rural counties, and a marked increase from 2021 to 2023. I don't want to spend much time on the weeds on this, but just to give you a glimpse of individuals versus families, increases across both. The orange bar are people in families, the yellow bar are individuals. And it's just to say, so we saw from 2022 for individuals a rise from 960 to 1,017. This is obviously 4 counties. And in families from 1876 to 2288. So it's like a gasp, right? There's a big gasp as we were looking at this data. Again, breaking it down to the 3 counties, a rise in individuals from last year to this year. It's not a huge rise, from 400 to 427, and then in families from 142 to 195. The real takeaway here is it's going in the wrong direction. I mean, that's the thing to absorb, unfortunately. Okay. Trying to find. Okay, another bar graph to show you unsheltered homelessness. These are people who are sleeping on the street. Tragically, this count is up almost 150% since 2021. Frankly, I'm going to just stop there. I have no additional commentary to the slide other than we are seeing this all over the region, all over the state, and all over the country. Unsheltered homelessness is on the rise. You recall in our mission statement, preventing and homelessness with a housing first approach that centers racial equity. You see here why racial equity is the work of racial equity is so critically important. It's a lot of numbers, and I'll just say it like this. If you compare, this is just the 3 county figures, to be clear. This is just for the 3 counties. Black people make up 2.3% of the general population 3 counties, and they make up 14.6% of the population that is homeless. They are overrepresented by over 6 times their population. For Hispanics, they're overrepresented 4 times as high as their population. It is stark. It is not unique. It exists in Hampden County as well. If you looked at the 4 county, although I will say the the representation of Blacks in homelessness in 3 County is that much higher than in Hampton County. And this is mirrored to different degrees all over the country. But what we are seeing here is not an accident. It is absolutely a byproduct of racist housing policies that began decades ago, that we are still living with. And there is systemic discrimination underlying our housing system. And we have everything we do, by definition, to end homelessness, to prevent homelessness, is to have a disproportionately positive impact in terms of closing the racial equity gap. Because we know that Blacks and Hispanics are massively disproportionately impacted in this problem. So that in terms of our own work as a society, as a community, on every level of government, we have the imperative to address this as a priority issue. It's really a pillar of racial discrimination, the history, the systemic discrimination underlying housing policy. So it's here before us. There's nothing left for interpretation, truly, and that can move us forward. Okay, it's not all bad, at all, actually, and that's where it's not all bad. While there is so much that is hard and difficult and tragic, really, there's incredible work going on, and there are a lot of lights at the end of a tunnel if we could just grow the light. So over the last year, homeless providers in Western Massachusetts helped over 950 people move from homelessness into permanent housing. The rehousing effort is constant. There is new funding that's coming in. That's also good news. Some from the federal ARPA funds, some from state funds. There's new housing coming online. And that brings us to this statistic, creating the housing. There's over 1,000 affordable housing units in the development pipeline over the next 5 years. The problem is it's only in 18 cities and towns among 101 cities and towns across all of Western Massachusetts. So we know we've got to expand this. We know Northampton gets a gold star on this, truly. I mean, I don't know whether you're following the news about the new housing on Crafts Avenue that's going up, and then new housing on Bridge Road with the old nursing home. So we have a very supportive city on affordable housing. We have good developer, and with Valley Community Development Corporation, that's what I meant to call out. And it's still not enough. I mean, nothing is enough, but there's really good work afoot. While we have 1,000 units in the pipeline, we have an 11,000 affordable housing unit gap. So, it depends on which side of the cup we're looking at, how we're going to feel emotionally around where we're at, or just even as a practical matter, how to feel about it. We have good work happening. It's not at nearly the scale it needs to be. And by 2025, the affordable housing gap is predicted to be at 19,000 units. So we have an extraordinary amount of catch up to do. And the truth is, public housing and subsidized housing was decimated in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan. He wanted to shrink government and put it in a bathtub. And when it comes to housing, he did. His policies, the Republican policies of that time, decimated investment. So it's not mysterious why we are where we are. I mean, there are a lot of other factors that we can talk about too, but it starts with a 40-year ago decimation of public funding in housing. So it's not surprising then that we have an extraordinary amount of catch up to do. And the only way we're going to do it in anything less than another 40 years is if we invest billions of dollars now. I mean, and that's the reality. Okay. The next data point. So I want to just use this 184 units of new permanent supportive housing. I want to speak to really what I want to call out is the term permanent supportive housing. You're going to hear a few terms in the world of housing for people who are most vulnerable, who've experienced chronic homelessness, who have multiple disabilities. You'll either hear permanent supportive housing or low threshold housing. Those are two terms of art that are used somewhat interchangeably, partly defined by funding streams. Permanent supportive housing sounds like what it is. It's permanent housing with support services attached for people who need that to stay housed. And low threshold housing is goes to the housing first. They both are housing first oriented, but it's more, it's called that, calling out more the housing first principle, like for people who are chronically, not necessarily chronically homeless, who people with disabilities, who have need, and that disability, again, could be mental health, substance use, physical, and who, but it does come with support services. So the difference is permanent supportive housing is a funding stream from the federal government that is allocated to chronically homeless people with disabilities. Low threshold housing is more frequently a state term that has a funding stream where you do not need to be chronically homeless, but you do need to have additional support. And there's a lot of housing in the pipeline there too. I'm going to spend 1 second on this. I mean, not literally, but a few seconds, just to say rental assistance. It's another point of advocacy that you'll see in a couple of slides more. We know it works. We know it works. If we're trying to prevent people from becoming homeless, is to fuel the rental assistance budget in the state. Sadly, I mean, there's a happy and a sad. Happily, this fiscal year state budget increased the prevention line item, but it created a cap on rental assistance of $7,000 per household when it was $10,000 during COVID. And they put it down, which to a previous, it was not entirely random. It used to be 7,000. My only point in this is that it was a stunner for many of us in this work that they reduced the cap of rental assistance at this time. I mean, it's not the time to reduce rental assistance, and it means more people are going to experience homelessness as a result. Every single day in Western Massachusetts, just between Hamden, Springfield area, and Hampshire here, 125 to 150 applicants show up at the door of Wayfinders, which is our regional front door for rental assistance, to apply for assistance. So the need is quite overwhelming. Eviction filings, another indicator of the precariousness of housing stability. From 2022 to 2020, from January through August, comparing one year to the next, a 36% increase in eviction filings. It's terrifying. Okay, this is an overly full slide. We are not talking through everything at all. What it does do, and the thank you for your leadership support is a borrowed slide from when we met with legislators. So just to make it real that this is a piece of advocacy right here. When we talk about the scale of this problem and how overwhelming it is, and we talk about that there are solutions that will make a massive difference, this is a bird's eye view by virtue of it being so many items that would, taken together, make that difference. And what our real point is, in partnership with our statewide partners across the state, is actually it's a time for big, bold action. It's not a time to pass one bill. It's a time to do comprehensive housing justice reform. And that's where we have these three pillars: preventing displacement, preserving existing housing, creating more affordable housing, housing people who are unhoused. Every one of these I've given you examples of pieces of legislation that have been filed, that are going through the legislature right now in this legislative session, that should pass and are desperately needed. So, I imagine there'll be some follow-up communication where the slide deck could be shared, but where if anyone has any additional questions, or also on our website. And I want to wrap up my talk right now so I can hear your questions. We can go back to any one of these. I want to also flag the housing bond bill, which is you're about to read about that in the paper any day now. Every 5 years or so, last one was in 2018, the legislature and the governor sign a bond bill, which is essentially providing money for affordable housing. I just pulled out, just to give you a sense of the trust of the funds that are in this bond bill: affordable housing, housing stabilization, housing innovations. It goes on. We know that Governor Healey's administration is about to release its bond bill, which then follows the course of all legislation, goes to the legislature for debate and amendments. The word is that they are treating the bond bill, am I losing? No. They're treating the bond bill as a potential comprehensive action, where they're going to have not just dollars for affordable housing, but policy change, like we've heard promise about proposing to enact the local option transfer fee for affordable housing, which would enable communities to adopt a transfer fee on the highest end sale homes to then have that fee move into an affordable housing trust fund for a community. So that's one example of a policy change that may be in the bill. So in other words, our big hope and our big push has been how many of the policy changes that you saw on the last screen, on this screen, can get into the bond bill. So that's like the newest, latest, greatest engine that we're all waiting for. And then lastly, my last slide is really about how we make a difference. And I can't begin to stress the difference a single email or phone call, whichever form is more comfortable to you, makes around to our legislators for you to weigh in on what you think is important. And that, of course, goes for every issue, but I'm here to talk about housing. The great news is we have a fantastic legislative delegation in Western Mass, and in Northampton in particular, with Senator Comerford and Representative Sabadosa. They don't need convincing at all. They are champions. They're amazing. We're so grateful to them. And they would be the first to say, write me, call me, because as champion as they are flooded. They are champions because they are fabulous legislators, they're champions of hundreds of issues. And we're not suggesting the one thing I completely reject is do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do the food insecurity. Do housing, don't do childcare. Obviously not. At the same time, they need to know that all of those issues are need to be front and center, and they already know it. They need to know that you know it and that you care about it, and that it then empowers them. They would say, give me the power with your communication, because that gives me the power to go to my Speaker of the House or my Senate President and say, I'm hearing from my constituents, you got to move on this. So you are working in partnership with supportive legislators to give them the credibility and the advocacy power they need inside the chamber. So that's my broad brush. I put the network blog link on there one more time, because that's the network's vehicle for saying, action alert, take a minute, write your legislators, or simply to say, here's what's just happened in the state budget or the federal budget on housing. If you want to stay connected in the loop around what's happening in Western Mass, in the state, in the nation, and you want the option to act on it, join the network blog. That's my presentation. Now I'm up for your questions and conversation.
So here's how we're going to work this. If you have a question, those of you out there in the room, ask it, and then Pamela will repeat it back for the people in Zoom. If you're on Zoom, please put your questions in the chat, and I'm either going to try to figure out how to make my mic work, or I will walk over here and read it.
I can also just read it in the chat.
Okay, Pamela will read it. Okay.
There's a question right now in the chat that I'll just take since they're first up. It says, if the Western Mass demand, it's from Patricia, if the Western Mass demand is 3,500 units and the unit cost is $300,000, that is $1 billion. Can you comment on the tiny house model as a way to transition to more permanent housing at lower cost? Yeah, I mean, my comment is yes. Yes to tiny homes. Yes, that's one of our pieces of legislation. I mean, that we support, not ours. Senator Oliveira is the sponsor. And I also just want to flag Senator Comerford, our senator, is the sponsor for the transfer fee for affordable housing, lead sponsor. But Senator Jake Oliveira from Springfield, Longmeadow, he is the sponsor of a bill to make tiny homes allowable under housing regulation. And we're supportive of it. It's on our list of priorities, because we are at a place where every single model should be authorized. I mean, because that's really what it's like, if there's capacity to do tiny homes, let's make sure people can do tiny homes. So yes, I believe that it's a part of the puzzle, and it is not, it can't stand alone, but we need to have that too. That's my short answer. I don't know if that is sufficient, but I see well, I'll take turns in case there's turns to be taken. Is there any question from the group that's in person? Yes.
First of all, I join in saying thank you for all the work you're doing.
You're very welcome. He's thanking me. I'm going to translate. I'm translating. And I'm saying you're welcome, but you heard that part. Okay, thank you.
But you had the 4 pillars, and under each pillar there was 4, 5, or 6 bills. And you said, I think you were saying, don't worry about the individual bills. We want to have a
Appreciate your ask. Okay, thank you for that. I'd love to clarify, because you know what? I spoke wrong. I mean, I spoke wrong in a way that would be understood. I'm going to. He said, our question asker noted that I referred to the bills page, with the 4 pillars and a number of bills under each, and said, don't worry about the bills, we need comprehensive. Okay, and let me clarify, do worry about the bills. But I meant more like in this moment and this presentation, it would take a long time to go through each bill. And I actually, depending on the interest of this audience, I'm happy to go back to that slide and talk for a minute about each bill. I defer to you. I want to be sensitive to whether it was too much detail and whether there were other questions. But those bills, so I will just name a few just to make them real again. Access to counsel and evictions. Right now, over 90% of landlords have lawyers and less than 10% of tenants have lawyers. And that means a system grossly out of balance. It's a complicated law, the eviction law. And it means that 2/3 of tenants are, no, that's a misstatement. Over 20% of tenants are defaulting. They're not even making it into the courtroom. They're just being evicted because they don't know what it is that the law is asking of them. And access to counsel would give people who are being evicted, low-income people, a chance to have a lawyer. That's one example. But I'm going to stop here because I see other questions. But no, please, every single bill. That's why I want you to join the network blog, because that is the most meaningful, concrete takeaway, because then you will be in the loop as hearings come up on the blogs, on the bills. And as there's opportunity to push these bills forward, then you can dive in to the specifics that are on tap. So I see Sherry has a question. Hi, Sherry. I'm sad to ask this question. If we think of the number of people as water, quote unquote, will other individuals, quote unquote, flood Massachusetts from other states that are not as proactive? Obviously, you can't have a residency qualification. You know what? I appreciate your, I almost want to say courage, because it depends on the audience whether or not that takes courage, but I appreciate you asking that question. And my answer is, because people say that now, never mind changing, we are the only right to shelter for children in the country. We are the only state that has legal entitlement to shelter for children who are experiencing homelessness. The only state in the nation. The only other city that has a right to shelter for all is New York City. So actually, I think maybe Washington, D.C. does, but I know New York City does. And Massachusetts, I know, is the only state in the nation with the right to shelter for children. So there's when this family shelter crisis that we're facing right now, fueled and magnified by migrant families, but truly a crisis without migrant families. The numbers are so high without the influx of families from other countries. That question has sort of barely risen. Well, are we supposed to re-examine the right to shelter? And the great news is people have really pushed back. Leaders have pushed back on that and considered a point of pride that we have a right to shelter for children. Of course, frankly, in practice, many, many, many children are not protected by that right based on the criteria that is required to get into shelter. So it's imperfect, but it's better. It's better than every other state in the country. That's what I want to say. And to improve our policies to end homelessness, the data shows that it is It's very much on the margins how housing policy or shelter policy impacts people's moves. That there's many, it's a little bit similar to saying we need to reduce the business tax rate in order so businesses don't move out of the state. You know, data shows that that's not why businesses move. It's not why, because actually businesses are made of people who are anchored in their community, whether that's through schools or through church or through synagogue or through community. In the same way, policy, having sound housing policy does not create a flood of people. We're just not, we don't see it. We don't see that over the decades of the right to shelter law, that we do see community grounding people where they are. They may come because they have a family member here. And so then there's a chain of that, but it's not housing policy. It's just not, the good news is it doesn't, that concern, while completely valid to raise and learn about, has been debunked. So we can keep making good policy. Is there any other question from the group that's here in person? Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Racial equity is in the mission statement. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of policy.
Absolutely. Well, I think, Sarah asked, racial equity is in the mission statement. What does that mean in terms of policy? And well, for instance, when you look at like our priority of access to counsel in evictions is because if you look at the demographics of people being evicted, it's overwhelmingly people of color. It's the vast majority of people being evicted are people of color. So the response from a racial equity perspective is if you provide legal counsel to low-income people who are facing eviction, you are going to be righting some of the balance that exists, that fuels further racial inequity. And because there's a disproportionate number of people of color experiencing homelessness, again, by definition, to reduce homelessness, to create a higher cap on the prevention resource, to create more affordable housing that people who are homeless can have access to, all of that is going to reduce the disproportionate impact of people on people of color. That makes sense. So all these policies, literally, it is fair to say, by definition, if you pass a policy that prevents end homelessness, you are closing the racial inequity gap. Okay, I see Rachel has a question. I think tiny homes are terrific and very appropriate, but where can they go? So that is a great question. And that really goes, points to the big picture question of where does affordable housing go? And because whether it's tiny homes or, the city carved out its parking lot behind City Hall to create 28 more units of affordable housing and low threshold, some part of it low threshold housing, which is very exciting. So it is a matter of finding land, but more, I think to your point, the thing that is, where there's focus right now is, for instance, the nursing home on Bridge Road, pre-existing building, a landmass that exists. Let's convert it. That's what Valley CDC is doing. We'll be creating 50 units of mixed income and many affordable housing units. And Hadley Econo Lodge, they're working with that, with the Hadley Zoning Board that nixed Valley CDC's proposal to create 50 affordable housing units there, but they're appealing it, so it's not over yet. So clearly the first rung is going to buildings that exist as potential housing and converting them to housing and having money funneled into that. The tiny homes model is totally, as a matter of principle, one that communities should be considering. It also really speaks to that 18 or 19 communities with projects in the pipeline, when I showed you that slide of 101 communities. What we really need is more communities, and more communities that have more land to be more open to all sorts of building, tiny homes and more. And that goes to zoning reform, so that we've got, address the NIMBY, the not in my backyard, which is totally real and pervasive. And so we have a lot of work to do around that, around NIMBY and pushing back and pushing and sort of debunking the fears and the prejudices and the biases and helping communities understand that more affordable housing makes a more healthy community for everybody. So that's the work we have to do. Other questions? I see we're approaching 3 o'clock. I want to be sensitive to your time, but yes.
Seems like we're talking about tiny houses. No, are we talking about apartments as well?
Oh, most definitely. Tiny homes is so he asked, so just for their listeners on Zoom, yes, it seems like we're talking about tiny homes primarily. And let me clarify, the reason we're talking about tiny homes is because it was questions in the chat. But the Network to End Homelessness is not stressing tiny homes. I mean, we are supportive of them if communities, we are supportive of a bill, we're supportive of every avenue to create more housing, but actually we would put that quite low on the list relative to our priorities of creating more permanent affordable housing and permanent supportive housing that is full-on housing that's not tiny homes. So to be clear, that's definitely our focus. I appreciate this chance to clarify. If there's anything else people are thinking like, huh, please ask me. I will continue to clarify. Okay, so Devora says, this is a question from a participant on the chat. Can you speak to the need for new models of home ownership and cooperative rentals? You know, I'm not sure I can speak to that in a way that is grounded enough. It's not really my expertise because the network is focused on more affordable housing rentals. I mean, we're just trying to increase the rental market. I mean, we're all for home ownership. Again, don't misunderstand me. It's fantastic, the new home ownership models, but it's not something I'm an expert on. And cooperative rentals, I'm not either. So I'm sorry, Devora, I'm not helpful to you on this one. I apologize. But Fran says, could you write the name in the chat of the legislation that we should call our rep about? Here's what I think I want to do. Let me just think about this for 1 second. This is a great question. Totally appreciate it. I would say that the transfer fee, but what I'm going to do, I'm not screen sharing, right? So you're not having to see what I mean, you don't have to follow my crazy screens that I'm about to do. What I am going to do is get on the blog, get on our network website. In fact, sorry, I'm talking to myself. That's what I'm going to put this in the chat. Never mind seeing it on a slideshow. Let me put in the chat right now the link to our blog. And actually, the thing that I like about this, you're going to happen to see, I could put on the subscribe link, but I'm not doing that. And for those who are in the audience, will they be emailed this? Can they be emailed this? No, they can't be? Okay, well, westernmasshousingfirst.org, that's it. But on the, so if you were to, in fact, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to screen share this. Just again, it's a little limited because it's people in person can't. All right, is this large enough to? Not really. I don't exactly know how to make it hard. Well, I'm just going to read. So for instance, FYI, transfer fee bill hearing tomorrow. That was yesterday. We had a hearing on the real estate transfer fee bill. The Joint Committee on Revenue, a state hearing. I testified on behalf of the network via Zoom. That's the other thing to know. When these hearings come up, there's now a COVID silver lining. They're now also virtual. They're hybrid. And so you can testify from Western Massachusetts. And so I testified in support of that. But as I scroll down, you can see legislature, there's updates on the legislature passes veto overrides on housing. And then action, housing committee on housing committee hearing on priority bills. So what I want to say is, and I know the last thing I'm going to do to put in the chat. So I'm going to show you our homepage. And call to action, you see, here's our legislative priorities. And I know this is too small. I apologize to people in the room. Oh, this is not coming up. There it is. Oh, shoot. No. Sorry. I wanted to get this in the, so Fran, my answer to you, I think, I'm going to stop the share so I can do this more efficiently, and I realize we're at time. That my answer to you is to subscribe to the blog. And it's the orange button, very obvious in the corner of the blog page, because it's best to do the emails in coordinated fashion, like any organizing. And for those on Zoom, I just put in the chat the legislative priorities that you can read more. And if you're interested in learning more, if you couldn't write down and you want me to follow up with you with links, I'm happy to do that for those of you who are in person. So bottom line, us working together, echoing our voices. Imagine 800, when you're alone in your computer and you get an action alert and you're like, what difference does it make? Think 800, even if it's a 10%. I mean, it's would be many, many emails to your legislator, and it would be heard. Our legislators would absolutely pay attention, and it would make a difference, and they'd be grateful. It's not bothering them. Of course it's not bothering them, it's their job, but even as we love our legislators, it is helpful to them. So to stay connected via the blog is our best way forward to have a coordinated impact. And I think on that note, I'm going to end, and I'm going to thank you for your time and your interest in this issue, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you out there on Zoom. Thank you so much, those of you here in the audience. This was just wonderful and passionate and urgent, and I urge you all to follow Pamela's advice and let our legislators hear from you. So thank you so much, and there'll be another speaker in a month. James Lowenthal talking about dark skies, and we'll try it again with hybrid and see how that goes. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.